I didn't think my husband's friends would do this. Hi, I'm Camilla. I'm 35 years old, and I want to share with you a story I never thought I would live. Before continuing the story, I ask you for a second to give a like to the video. It doesn't bother you at all, and it helps me a lot. Let's continue. It's a story that continues to shock me every time I remember it, and I know it will take your breath away as well. It all started one summer night. My husband Andres had organized a get-together at our house with his two best friends, Ricardo and Javier. These get-togethers had become a tradition, that we get together to watch soccer games, have a few beers and laugh about anecdotes from their youth. I, for one, enjoyed seeing them happy and preparing them something delicious to accompany the evening. But that night, something in the air was different. I felt a tension that I couldn't explain, a feeling that something was going to happen. After a light dinner and a few glasses of wine, I retired early to our room. I wanted to give them their space and take the opportunity to rest. Andres, Ricardo, and Javier stayed in the living room, laughing and drinking, enjoying the company. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about the laughter and the noise coming from the living room. There was something in the atmosphere that felt different, a kind of electricity that I couldn't explain. I decided to get up and get a glass of water to try to calm down. As I left the room, I saw Ricardo and Javier in the kitchen, pouring themselves another round of drinks. Andres was in the bathroom. Seeing me, Ricardo smiled and invited me to join them. I hesitated for a moment, but then accepted. I figured one more drink wouldn't hurt. We sat at the kitchen bar and began to chat. The conversation was pleasant, although I could sense a certain tension in the air. Ricardo and Javier were looking at me in a way I had never seen before. Their gazes were intense, penetrating, and made me feel a mixture of nervousness and excitement that I could not control. The conversation became more intimate, and little by little, we began to talk about more personal matters. As the night progressed, Andres returned from the bathroom and joined us. He seemed drunker than usual and soon announced that he was going to bed. He kissed me on the cheek and whispered that he wouldn't be long. I nodded, and he retreated to the bedroom, leaving me alone with Ricardo and Javier. Ricardo leaned towards me, in a low tone, confessed that he had always felt a special attraction for me. Javier, with an accomplice smile, added that he had also felt the same. His words left me stunned. I didn't know what to say or how to react. At that moment, the tension in the air became palpable. I felt a wave of heat running through my body and an uncontrollable curiosity. Ricardo moved closer, and without warning, he kissed me. His lips were firm and passionate, and although my mind told me I should have, my body responded in a different way. Javier watched with a smile as Ricardo kissed me. I let myself be carried away by the moment, surrendering to the desire he had awakened in me. Ricardo took me by the hand and led me to the salt sofa. Javier did not follow closely, and in the blink of an eye I was between the two of them, feeling their caresses and kisses all over my body. The outside world disappeared. There was nothing but the pleasure and desire we shared at that moment. Ricardo and Javier took turns kissing and caressing me, taking my arousal to levels I had never experienced before. Their hands were expert. They knew exactly where to touch to make me shudder. The intensity of the moment enveloped us completely. I felt a connection with them that was inexplicable, a mixture of the forbidden and the exciting that made me lose my mind. My moans filled the room, and even though I knew Andres was sleeping a few feet away from us, I couldn't stop myself. Ricardo and Javier were comfortable, hungry wolves, devouring every part of my being. Their bodies moved in unison, creating a symphony of making that enveloped the three of us. There was no room for guilt or remorse, only for pure and unbridled desire. Finally, the dawn began to fade, and with it, the intensity of our actions. We parted exhausted and aware that we had crossed a line that had no return. Ricardo and Javier got up, and without saying a word left the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts. A still sound asleep, Andres. I lay on the couch trying to process what had happened. I felt a mixture of guilt, excitement, and confusion. I knew I had to keep what had happened a secret, that I could never confess to Andres what had happened, but I also knew that I had discovered a part of me that night that I didn't know about, a part that longed for something more. From that night on, Ricardo and Javier's visits changed. Every time we saw each other, there was an tension in the air, a connection that reminded us of what we had shared. We knew we couldn't repeat it, but the desire was there, always latent. Days later, Ricardo called me. His voice was serious, almost worried. He asked me to meet him in a cafe near my work. I accepted, although with some fear and curiosity. We met at noon, and he seemed different, more reserved. He bluntly confessed that he couldn't stop thinking about me and what had happened. His words awakened in me a whirlwind of emotions. I told him that I felt the same, but that we had to be careful. Ricardo nodded and took my hand. We looked at each other in silence, aware that we were playing with fire. That afternoon, I returned home with a mixture of mixed feelings. Andres noticed my distraction, but didn't ask questions. I felt that a part of me was living a double life, a life full of secrets and hidden desires. Every time I saw Ricardo and Javier, the attention increased, their glances, their complicit smiles. Everything reminded me of that night, and the desire it had awakened in me. One night, while Andres was sleeping, I received a message from Javier. He asked me to go out to the balcony. When I did, I saw him standing downstairs. On the street, he invited me to go downstairs, and although I knew it was risky, I couldn't resist. I went down silently, and he took me for a walk. We walked through the deserted streets, talking about everything and nothing. I felt a special connection with him, an attraction I couldn't explain. We stopped in a park, and he kissed me. It was a soft kiss, full of tenderness and restrained passion. We met several times after that, always in secret, always with the adrenaline of being discovered. Each encounter was more intense, more passionate. I knew I was betraying for Andres, but the desire was stronger than the guilt. Ricardo also continued to seek my company. We would meet in discreet places, sharing moments of intimacy and pleasure. The situation became untenable. I knew I could not go on like this, but I could not find a way to stop. Every encounter with Ricardo and Javier was an adventure, a mixture of excitement and danger that made me feel alive. But I also knew that I was playing with fire, and that at any moment everything could fall apart. One night while we were in bed, Andres stared at me. His eyes were serious, and his voice, a whisper, told me he knew what was going on, that he had noticed the furtive glances and encounters. My heart stopped. I didn't know what to say, how to react. Andres continued telling me that even though it hurt, he couldn't stop loving me. He asked me to be honest with him, to tell him the truth. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. I confessed everything to him, every detail, every encounter. Andres listened silently, his face a mask of pain and sadness. When I finished, he looked me in the eyes and told me he needed time to process. He got out of bed and left the room, leaving me alone with my guilt and regret. The next few days were a torment. Andres was distant, avoiding any conversation about what had happened. Ricardo and Javier also noticed the change, and began to pull away. I felt like my world was falling apart, and there was no way to fix it. Finally, one night Andres called me in the living room, told me that he had been thinking a lot and that although it hurt him, he wanted to try to save our marriage. He asked me to cut off all contact with Ricardo and Javier to try to rebuild what we had lost. I agreed, knowing it would be difficult but willing to try. Cutting off contact with Ricardo and Javier was more painful than I imagined. I felt I was losing a part of me, a part I had discovered thanks to them. But I also knew that if I wanted to save my marriage to Andres, I had to do it. So I began to avoid their calls and messages, and little by little they distanced themselves from me. However, the attention on my marriage did not immediately disappear. Andres and I tried to move on, to rebuild the lost trust. But there were days when the pain and distrust were overwhelming. Andres would look at me with those eyes full of unspoken questions, and I felt like every day was a struggle to prove to him that I was committed to him. A couple of weeks later, Andres suggested that we go to couples counseling. Although I was resistant to the idea at first, I finally agreed. I knew we needed help to get through this and that we couldn't do it alone. The first session was difficult, full of silences, awkwardness, and repressed emotions. But little by little, we began to open up and talk honestly about what had happened. Therapy helps us to better understand our feelings and to communicate more effectively. Andres expressed his pain and confusion, and I tried to explain how I had felt trapped in a web of desire and guilt. The therapist gave us tools to rebuild trust and work on our relationship. As the sessions progressed, I felt that Andrew and I were beginning to reconnect, even though the wound was still fresh. We were willing to work together to heal. There were good days and bad days, but we slowly began to regain the intimacy and complicity we had lost. However, I couldn't help but think of Ricardo and Javier. Although I had cut off contact with them, their memories continued to haunt me. I remembered their caresses, their kisses, and the desire I had felt. I wondered if I could ever forget what we had shared, or if they would always be a shadow in my life. One night, while Andres and I were having dinner, I received a message from Javier. My heart raced as I saw his name on the screen. I felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Andres noticed my nervousness and asked me who I was. I showed him the message, not knowing what else to do. Andres read it silently and then looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Javier's message was simple. I need to talk to you. It's important. Andres asked me if I wanted to respond. I felt a surge of mixed emotions, but finally decided I needed to know what he wanted to tell me. I responded to the message and we agreed to meet at a cafe the next day. Andres accompanied me to the cafe, but stayed in the car while I went inside. Seeing Javier, I felt a pulse of nostalgia and sadness. We sat down and started talking. Javier told me he had decided to move to another city to start over. I felt that staying close would only complicate things for everyone. I thanked him for being honest and wished him the best. We said goodbye with a hug, aware that it was the final goodbye. That night I told Andres what had happened. He listened quietly and then hugged me. I felt we had taken an important step towards healing. I knew there was still a long way to go, but I also knew we were on the right path. The next few months were a process of rebuilding and rediscovery. Andres and I strived to strengthen our relationship, to find new ways to connect and enjoy time together. We started Paula doing activities we had never tried before, like traveling to new places and participating in cooking workshops. Each small victory brought us closer together and reminded us why we had decided to fight for our marriage. One afternoon while we were walking in the park, Andres took me by the hand and told me that he felt we were over the worst of it. He told me that although he would never forget what had happened, he had learned to forgive me and trust me again. His words filled me with hope and gratitude. I thanked him for giving me a second chance and promised not to let him down. Life returned to a kind of normalcy, albeit different. Ricardo and Javier were no longer part of our close circle, and although I sometimes felt their absence, I knew it was for the best. Andres and I had learned to communicate better and to value our relationship in a deeper way. The experience had changed us, but it had also strengthened us. One day, while checking my email, I received an unexpected message from Ricardo, saying that he was also moving and wanted to say proper goodbye. Andres and I discussed the situation, and although it was a difficult decision, we decided to meet him to close that chapter of our lives. We met in a quiet park. Ricardo looked calmer, as if he had found some sort of inner peace. We talked about everything and nothing, remembering the good times and acknowledging the mistakes of the past. We asked each other with a handshake and a hug, knowing it was the last take, and a hug, knowing it was the last time we would see each other. After that goodbye, I felt like I could finally put what had happened behind me. Andrew and I moved on, building a life together based on renewed trust and love. We had been through the fire and came out stronger on the other side. In time, the wound closed completely. Andrew and I celebrated our 10th anniversary with renewed joy and a deeper understanding of what commitment means. Looking back, I realized that although the experience had been painful, it had also taught us valuable lessons about love, trust, and forgiveness. This is my story, a story of desire, betrayal, and redemption. A story that showed me that sometimes the forbidden can be the most tempting, but that it is also possible to find the way back. I hope that my experience has awakened in you intense emotions and made you reflect on your own lives and relationships. Life is full of unexpected moments, and sometimes those moments are what define us. Thank you for listening to me, and always remember to live your life with compassion and no regrets. Learn to value what you have, communicate openly with your loved ones, and never take love and trust for granted. Life is a journey full of surprises, and every challenge is an opportunity to grow and learn.